everyone. So today I'm so excited to have a special guest, Dr. Chris Lee. Chris, I was preparing to introduce you for this episode, and it was a bit challenging, but the good challenging. I realized that if I want to simplify it, you're an expert in self-regulation, but there's so many layers underneath this. You've done, you're a scientist, you help millions or like thousands of people, you have a podcast, and also you talk about so many deep and important things. So I don't think I can give you justice by just saying you're an expert in self-regulation. So why don't you introduce yourself to the listeners?
Yeah, this has been the crux of trying to make a bio for myself is that you want to say you're multifaceted and the Renaissance and we do all of things, but really at the core of it, so much of it breaks down to self-regulation for me. Breaks down to understanding how the nervous system is interacting with different environments and the participation of your mind consciously inside of those environments, because that's a huge distinction. So I am a consultant. I am a speaker. I no longer run a practice. And what I do most of my days is I'm a dad. And I got to have the amazing opportunity to create a business that allows me to do dad things full time. And if any parent out there is like listening to this, you quickly understand that your internal state is directly mirrored inside of your children.
Mm.
And I started to get those lessons early on in parenting, and my daughter is now 6. So I've taken all of the self-regulation from me trying to heal up my own trauma and all of like the just hard things that I've been through, and try to make them more applicable. You understand, being in academia, that some of those research papers that come out are some of the most groundbreaking things that can help so many people, but trying to understand it for like layman's terms is like it's written in a different language. So my goal in making content and sharing and speaking and all of that is try to make self-regulation, neuroscience, the brain, just digestible for the daily person that's struggling with stress or anxiety or depression.
Yeah, and I think my hope and my vision for today's episode is many of my listeners, they do emotional eating when they're not feeling well. They go to food, and there's a lot of shame and guilt and hate and, all of this. And your
Yeah.
content is so, relevant. I guess the first question is for you, what's the difference between a self-regulation, which I feel comes from a positive place, versus self-control that, is not always coming from a place of love.
Yeah. So I think self-regulation is really starting to understand that if you want the flower to bloom, and I don't know how to turn off these balloon reactions. If you're listening to this, I have like the updated iOS, and I have like, if I put my hands up, it gives you like the thumbs up and there's balloons in the background. So if this ever comes out on video, you'll know what I'm talking about. But self-regulation is understanding that if the flower doesn't bloom, you don't blame the flower. And self-control, or trying to control anything outside of your internal state and the actions that you take, is done in an effort to force the flower to bloom, potentially in a space that the environment does not enrich it. And then if the flower doesn't bloom and we're trying to control the flower and not the environment, then it starts to build up shame and guilt and remorse and everything else inside of it. And especially if we are the flower, or especially if our partner is that flower and we're trying to force them into something that the environment doesn't nurture, it really starts to change how we interact with those things. So in my world, and especially, I can only talk for myself here, I have continued the practice of letting go, of surrender, of release, because it's so hard. Because, you know, the reason that I got here is I got hit by a car, lost my dad to suicide, and was a single dad all within like a year of each other, and like $200,000 in debt. And all of that happened when I was, before the age of 25. So I have all of these like very much crippling traumas in my life that brought me into this space of like, okay, if I don't control everything, then chaos is going to happen. The next worst thing is going to happen. I'm going to, not be able to pay for rent. And, my daughter and I aren't going to be able to eat, or I'm going to, lose all of the dreams and ambitions that I have. And the big challenge that goes along with that is you have to learn an aspect of surrender, and you also have to understand that there's an aspect of letting go of control and asking for help. That was the hardest thing for me, is truly just sitting down and saying, I need help. I can't do everything. I can try to do everything, but then I'm on this like burnout cycle up and down and all around. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about burnout. It's funny that you mentioned, but before that, yeah, I read about all the trauma that you had in like a year, very few months, was it, or a
Few
year?
months,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it was
Mm.
4 months between being hit by a car and suddenly being a dad.
Yeah, and in a way, I was like not surprised, but in a good way because your content resonates so much and is so deep that you feel that people that have such good content, it's coming from a place of, you've learned things through life. So I'm sorry that you've been through, but also, it's what you're like, you can see that what you say is coming from a place of you've experienced it. How didn't you burn out yourself, I guess? What happened that made you not burn out?
I did. That's the secret in all of that. It's the reason I can talk about burnout so well is that I burnt myself out on burnout. So um I had to when I found out that I was gonna have my daughter, I basically knew that I had, 8 months at that time to try to get my life together enough, right, at 23 years old, to, make enough money to pay for food and diapers and all of those different things. So I absolutely burned myself out because I was still finishing a doctorate. I was still trying to like take care of myself. I just lost my dad to suicide. So like I'm going through all of that. And then once my daughter was born, it was not a long period of time after that where I was suddenly a single dad. So it's just my daughter and I trying to go after this. And I'm young and still super broke, trying to figure out all of these things. So I burnt out super, super bad. So I think there's two caveats to this that I always want to talk about. Number one, it's the necessity of taking action to make sure that you're okay and your family's okay. And that was where I was, is like I didn't have a choice but to burn out because I needed food in the fridge. I needed
Mhm.
rent to be paid. I had to go do all of these things. And I had nowhere else to go do it. So I would stay up till 2 a.m. trying to study how to start a business and then wake up at 5 or something like that, take care of my daughter, and then take her to class with me, take her to clinic with me, take her to all of these different places. And then after that, take her, back home, put her down for a nap. And when she would nap, I would study for my boards. And going through that, I was barbecued. I was
Yeah.
absolutely barbecued. And the second part of that is the second caveat to this is that we build an attachment to the chaos, right? We
Mhm.
start
It's
to
so
start to
true.
get addicted to the adrenaline of like, well, when I actually do start to slow down now, that doesn't feel good anymore, right? It doesn't feel like thrilling. And that addiction to the thrill of so many things, when people try to start to slow down and they get into self-regulation or they start to get into healthy relationships is the other one, you're like, I don't, this just doesn't feel right. That's not the thing at all. This is what feels right, right? So don't let your emotion dictate the storyline. Let the logic control your perception of the emotion, right? And those two things
Yeah.
are hugely different.
Yeah, I've seen a post that you did on, I think recently on Instagram on self-sabotage, and I think some listeners could resonate with that because you start, if we really focus on not eating our emotions, but I mean it's so much broader than that, but let's focus on that. They start, okay, doing the right thing for some time and everything, and then there are subconscious, they're addicted, as you say, to chaos, to struggle, to being victim, all of this, and then maybe they sabotage, they go on a huge binge.
Yeah.
What's your perspective on that? Like why and
So
how to stop it? Why does it come and how to stop it? Maybe what does it happen what happens in the brain as well?
yeah,
Many
so
questions.
again, we're gonna flip the page on this for a second to say that food is a really emotionally charged subject. And I also have to talk about this from like the lens of addiction and the lens of habit formation and emotions, but I'm not speaking from personal experience on this. So I
Yeah,
want to always give that caveat that I'm more than happy to talk about a
yeah,
lot of these things to just try to help out, but it's not something that I have gone through. So I'm
yeah,
here to try to provide perspective and support. But I also understand that a lot of listeners that are probably diving into this take what works for you and start to implement it slowly into your life if something like really resonates with you.
Yeah,
So
I love
what
your
starts to
caveat.
happen,
Your disclaimer is so important.
yeah,
Thank you. Yeah.
and one of the things that got me super frustrated, and the reason that I say this a lot on shows or interviews that I don't have the personal experience on, is that I watched a lot of people get really logical but not practical parenting advice from somebody that was like 19 years old, that was living out of like a Sprinter van and like, living life on a laptop and stuff like that. And so many people create this tremendous amount of judgment and criticism for themselves for not being in a state that mirrors that other person's reality.
Yeah.
So what's
Yeah.
optimal for somebody else is not real for you,
Mm.
right? And understanding that distinction is going to save you from so much judgment and criticism. So that's the reason that I share some of these things, is that what's optimal for me, what's real for me, what I share inside of here is what works for my life. And the goal for, every podcast, everything that I try to do is to take what feels right for you, what you think would be beneficial in your life right now, and take 1% of it and deploy it.
Yeah.
So to go back to your original question, I think what starts to happen is that there's three parts to habit formation, right? So there's a trigger, there's the behavior, and then there's the reward. And things that are low lying dopamine rewarding behaviors, right? Things that give you a lot of pleasure without a lot of reward. Um, we tend to clip onto those typically as like a dissociation tactic. So when things get overwhelming and we don't know what to do with the overwhelm, we go to the lowest hanging fruit. So we go to scrolling, we go to porn, we go to food. And I'm here to say that it's not necessarily that those things are bad in the short term, right? So if you have a like dam full of water that breaks, the things that you want to do are like to protect the highest, most valuable things in your life, right? But it's not to say that the dam is going to be flooding the town forever. So you have to understand that there's seasons to these things as well. So if you're doing like 3 dissociation patterns, right? Eating, porn, smoking, drinking, whatever it is, I would start to work on one of those things. Not all of them. I would work on one of them. And the reason that I say one of them, and the reason that I'm going to say this as well, is work on the one that is the smallest and the one that is the easiest, right? So if it's drinking, for some people, that one's kind of easy because, oh, I only drink, or the other one is smoking cigarettes. I only smoke cigarettes when I go out. Peachy. Don't go out and drink anymore, right? Invite your friends home or like do game nights and stuff like that. So, and that gets into, the trigger and then the behavior. So you start to modify the behavior. And behavioral neuroscience, the thing that I really spent a lot of time diving deep into, starts to dictate and tell us that behavior is one of the longest levers that we can play in order to reroute how the brain perceives the reality around us. So if you want to change how you're thinking, feeling, and acting is the thing that changes the other two the fastest and the most sustainably. So a huge part of that behavior modification is putting yourself in the right environment, right? So if you say that your goal is to be more fit, you cannot spend time inside of a Pizza Hut, can't spend time inside of like the bar or the pub. You need to spend time out in nature. So if you can start to understand some of these different things, you'll start to better understand that the nervous system is not being triggered. The nervous system is predictive, right? And this is a huge thing for my emotional eaters that are out there, for people that are struggling in different facets of their life. The biggest thing that I want people to know here is that in those worlds, it is the effort that you reward, not the accomplishment, that's going to be that third part of celebratory, right? So to go back to that habit formation, because I know we're kind of bouncing around, trigger, behavior, reward, right? So the reward that we get from food and some of these other addictive behaviors, we tend to think that it's like, oh, the intrinsic, reward of like feeling satiated from food. But really what it is that it has put the pain away enough that you don't have to deal with it. So the reward of lack of pain is enough of a reward to create long-lasting behaviors. And this is a huge chunk of addiction and emotional eating as well, is that the alleviation of pain is reward in and of itself. So changing the relationship with pain will also change the relationship with the behavior itself.
Yeah. Oh my God, I have so many questions. Okay.
There's a lot. That was a lot.
Yeah, no,
I went on a rabbit hole. We went
it's
running.
really, really, really interesting. There are a few things that I say in my podcast. The first thing is, I always try to remember the listeners that yes, I'm not here to tell you that emotional eating is good or bad, but I'm thinking, I'm assuming if they're listening to this podcast, it's hindering their life. But
Yeah.
yeah, who am I to say that it's good or bad for you, you know? But okay, so you said trigger and then behavior and then reward. So a lot of the listeners let the behavior, which will be eating to soothe an emotion. The trigger will be, for example, going and seeing their families, let's say their
Mhm.
parents that were a bit, you know, yeah, a bit toxic or whatever. Not,
Loud,
yeah,
overstimulated.
yeah,
Yeah. Put whatever word. Yeah. We could
yeah,
just say that family is family, and I think
yeah.
everyone will get it.
Okay, so yeah, exactly. So let's say this was a trigger. Would you, and I know it's like it's not one size fits all, but would it be easier, like, as a starting point to stop being exposed to the trigger, to not to have the
So
behavior,
yeah, so you ask a really
avoid
good
the
questions.
trigger? Yeah.
So that would be the optimal,
Yeah.
right? And what is optimal is sometimes not realistic. So, okay, my family triggers me and then I start to like overeat. And it's like, all right, you can't just, I mean, some people can just cut the family out and say, like, it's not going to work for me. What I would start to say and what I would invite people to consider is that there is an emotional trigger that gets pulled up that is underneath the environmental trigger,
Mm.
right? So what feelings do your family inspire inside of you? And starting to relate and connect with that. Like I see you have the wheel of emotions behind you.
Yeah.
And if people don't know the wheel of emotions, or if they don't know the spectrum of emotions and things like that, when you're around your family, just look at some of these, emotional tools and try to find where you are inside of that. Because the discomfort of expressing that emotion is the behavioral driver to eating, right? So what I would tell most people, if we like try to make this as practical as possible, you got home for the holidays, right? Or you're around family and things like that. And you're like, I overeat when I am overstimulated and underappreciated and everything else. Awesome. Before we go into those environments, we're going to use the frontal cortex, which allows us to like pass through time and create a goal, right? So my daily goal for going inside of that and spending time with my family is not to completely stop overeating, but to simply have awareness for when I am eating, right? I just want awareness for when I am eating. That's it. So what we're doing is we're building awareness around the trigger, right? So I am eating, or at the end of the day saying, okay, I ate during these specific times. What created the environmental emotional trigger around me to create that, right? So the reason that we start to break this down is I call it A3, right? So A3 breaks down that you need to have awareness, alignment, and action, right? And so many people that are struggling with some of these things just don't have tactical tools around this. So the awareness that we're going to build is awesome. What is the emotion underneath the environment of spending time with your family, right? Do you feel criticism? Do you feel judgment? Do you feel lack of appreciation? Do you feel unworthy? Do you feel unjustified? Do you feel triggered by past traumas? Whatever that may be, right? Just starting to build awareness around that. Number two, alignment, right? And this is where we start to cast the goal. I start to feel this when that, right? And this is behavior modification. So the alignment of like, I overeat like 10 times a day when I'm with my family, or 3 times a day, or I overeat after my family goes to sleep or something like that. It's not that I'm not going to not overeat. I'm just going to put a window of time up and say that instead of immediately going to overeating, I'm going to spend 30 seconds just with myself, silence in 30 seconds, and a 30-second timer, right? All you got to do is sit in a chair for 30 seconds and just feel the discomfort. And then you can kind of go do whatever you feel like after that. And then the next day, moving that goal up to a minute. And what that starts to do is it builds a different relationship of I'm not avoiding the pain, I'm choosing to interact with it, because emotions are like putting water in a cup, right? And you have to carry that cup around everywhere you go. And the more emotions that are in that cup, the more the water fills up inside of that cup, the more that it spills around when you move, right? And what we want to do is not spill it, so we stay completely still. And when we have to completely stay still, we dissociate, which is the disconnection from where you are presently from, where you take yourself to emotionally. So dissociation, like addiction and everything else, is like taking us away from that present moment. And then we can stay completely still because the mind and body are so disconnected that we won't spill water because we're not emotionally plugged in. However, what we really want to do is not have to carry all the water in this cup. We want to pour it out, right? So the pouring out process is emotional integration, right? This is a huge chunk of emotional intelligence, is being able to sit in your shit, right? And it's not to be able to sit in it and like go down to Peru and like tear up ayahuasca or do a bunch of mushrooms in the woods with your friends or sit in a meditation for 3 hours or like put an entire memoir out on the internet. It's 30 seconds, right? Sit for 30 seconds and just invite yourself to feel. Invite yourself to consider what feeling is in your body and where it is at and what story it's trying to tell you. For so many of these emotions as well, it's relating to like small parts of ourselves that we left behind that are hiding inside of our emotional reality, right? So I overeat when I'm around my family because 12-year-old version of me doesn't feel safe to express what is true. I told my mom or my dad my dreams, and they completely said that that was unrealistic and silly. And that was the thing that I was most passionate about. Like I wanted to be a veterinarian. That was the only thing I wanted to be. My parents said that's silly. You shouldn't go take care of giraffes. You should go be a lawyer or a doctor, do something that's stable and healthy. And understanding that processing that emotion is just, you don't have to do anything. You just sit there and you feel. And it is hard and you cry and it's brutal. And at the end of it, you feel better. Right. And that's the thing is
Release.
like,
It's like a
yeah,
release.
it's the release of it. Right. Like imagine if you held a fist all day, right? You could do it for 5 minutes. You could do it for 10 minutes, but like 15 minutes, you're like, all right, my forearms like kind of starting to feel funny. Right. The trauma and the predictive mechanisms that the brain deploys constantly drips cortisol into the system, right? And cortisol, I mean, you like with doing your PhD on the eyes and things like that, converges our focus, right? Dilates the pupils, right? It has all of these different effects on the physiology of the body. So your body is in this constant rigidity from always like, I don't know what to expect emotionally. But when you start to take responsibility and start to put into the day, this is going to sound weird and etheric, I'm going to put an intention out into the day, right? To say, like, today, I'm going to give myself permission to feel freedom 5 times in my body. I want to feel free inside of my body 5 times or 3 times or 1 time today. I want to feel freedom inside of my body. Your brain will go seek out that opportunity. So you could be driving in the car and you roll down the window and the cool air on your face after a long day and you take a deep breath. You have 10 seconds of freedom. Congratulations. That is 10 more seconds than you had yesterday. And that growth is exponential, right? So now the next day you say, oh, I want to experience freedom 1 time today for 5 minutes, right? So then you start to cast and embed different predictive mechanisms into your future instead of your past predicting and analyzing how you should feel. You're using your mind to create a different intention for your day.
Yeah. Okay, I have a question. A bit, I'll challenge you a little bit because
Yeah.
I'm here to do so. No, but
Yeah.
I completely agree with you. I'm just thinking of a small proportion. It's not a small proportion. It is a proportion of people that are listening to this and are perfectionists. And I know you have a lot of content on perfectionist. I've listened to
Yeah.
a few of your episodes, and sometimes I repeat myself your words, not being awkward. But yeah, I say, "Oh, reward." Okay, I'm not gonna say anything just
Yeah.
to how do you say, yeah, for the listeners to be more surprised. But for the perfectionist that says, okay, my ideal is not to do emotional eating at all, or let's say do once a month, whatever. I'm not going to put numbers because it can trigger people, and they see themselves not up to their own standards.
Yeah.
You know, because we said, okay, reduce, let's say let's say you overeat X amount, reduce, let's say by 30%, 50%, and then yeah, and for those that I guess you understood my question. I don't need to
Yeah,
explain.
I understand your question that there, for so many people out there, it's all or nothing, right? I have
Yeah,
to stop or I
yeah,
have to go, right?
yeah.
Um, that in and of itself is something that I have dealt with in my own life, in my own
Mm.
regard, with like how I want to be a parent and how I want to show up and how I want to read, or, you know, all of these other different things. And the quote that I've had on my wall for a long time is done is better than perfect, right? Like the perfect thing that you can do is give yourself permission to make progress,
Yeah, I'm taking
And
notes.
it's
Done is better than perfect.
done is better than perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your capacity to take small action in small intervals and using the compounding effect of time is how
Mhm.
successful people in any facet really develop long-term strategy, right? So if you have that perfectionist tendency, I would say 9 times out of 10 people that are perfectionists are also people pleasers. And they're also these massive self-sabotagers. So when they step into that space of, you know what, I want to start to do this, I want to start to make change. And here's the perfect schedule, right? I'm going to go completely cold
Yeah.
turkey on this thing. There is such a thing as like a novelty threshold. And we see this like January 1st, right? Where people go through, they do their New Year's resolutions, and every day you probably have the capacity to make 5% change, truly. And most people on January 1st or 2nd, they say, I'm going to make 30% change, right? And they go to the gym for an hour, right? Or people
Yeah.
that start these like diet fads, they go, okay, on Sunday, I overate, didn't go to the gym, but on Monday, I'm going to do 3 meals, high protein, and I'm going to go to the gym for 3 days. So you don't have that availability on Monday. But what you do have is the availability from Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. So you take Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and you take all of those mental, emotional, cognitive, neurotransmitter, neural peptide resources, and you shove it into Monday, right? And then Tuesday comes along, and Monday was a good
Yeah.
day. And then Tuesday comes, and it's like, okay, this is a little bit harder today. I'm a little bit sore, but like, all right, now I'm going to steal from, I can't steal from Wednesday. I have to steal from Thursday, Friday, right? And then by the time the weekend or Friday hits, people completely have fallen off the wagon because there's no resources available. They're so burnt out on that. And this is why I tell people make small changes over long periods of time, right? And that's why like when I'm saying to
Yeah.
make those small changes in 30 seconds, 10 seconds, like Dr. Chris, is that really going to make a difference? 100%, right? The success rate of small change has like way more efficacy of like doing right action for people because it is so small, right? Like it's just small enough to break the threshold of this is something new, but not something so new that I can't do it. So if I tell you to like drop on the floor and do 100 push-ups right now, or 1,000 push-ups, right? Or 10,000 push-ups, I need to do 10,000 push-ups today, right? It's like I I I can't, right? I can do like
I'm
10
already depleted,
push-ups.
mentally, emotionally, physically depleted already just by
Exactly.
you.
Yeah, you start to go
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh. So like at 100 push-ups, like some people are like, yeah, I could probably do maybe 100
Yeah.
push-ups over like, 10, ever over, an hour. I could probably do that. So all right, 1,000, and it's like, all right, I gotta do 100 an hour for 10 hours. And it's like 1,000, and it's like, and you keep building it up and enough and enough. And then by the time you go, and let's just say you did 100 push-ups, tomorrow, if I ask you to do those same 100 push-ups, you're going to be so
Mm.
sore and so tired. And your body's going to say, hey, you did all of that yesterday. You're too fatigued to do it today. So before you even start, the system is going to try to break you down and say, don't even get started. We don't have the resource to do it. And that is what cognitive fatigue is. That's decision fatigue, and all of those things downstream affect behavior. So all of
Yeah.
that to say, small change for perfectionist is the long-term healthy thing, but it's hard.
Yeah.
And that's why I
Yeah.
say, progress over perfection and done is better than perfect. These small goals that you stack up over time is what you want to do. So if you want to stop overeating, if you want to lose weight, if you want to do any of these things, stack it up over 6 months, right? In 6 months, I want to have lost 20 pounds, right? That's awesome. Break it down month to month to month, right? 3 pounds a month. Awesome. You can start to go do that. And then every time you get closer to that goal, every time you go to the gym, you celebrate the ever loving shit out of it, right? And you like get to
Yeah,
have a
that's what
moment
you
of
said.
celebration. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, reward the effort and not the result.
Yes.
You said
So
it in one of the
perfectionists
podcasts.
reward accomplishment over effort. And that
Yeah.
drives over and over and over again that the effort that you put in is meaningless, right? But it's not.
Yeah.
But think about how all of us were raised. So there's a theory out there in psychology called attachment theory that says the way that your parents dictate their relationships with themselves and with you determines what kind of personality you start to develop and what kind of attachment that you have with other people instead of relationships. But a huge chunk of that as well starts to mirror your perception of you in relationships, including interpersonal relationship. So most of us when we were kids never got the reward for our effort. We only got reward for straight A's. We only got reward for, you know, first prize. We only got reward for those things. Versus like the parent that I'm choosing to step into now, I don't look at my daughter's grades, right? Like I know that she is competent and I know that she is doing really well in school, but like I ask her like, you know, how did it feel to like take the test today? How did it feel to like lean in and like do some of those things? Like, do you feel like it was good for you? Right. And because our house is stacked up in a way that completely nurtures creativity, inspiration, and science, from what I understand, and I still haven't looked at her grades, she's crushing it in school, right? But I haven't looked at her report cards ever, but she's crushing it and from what her mom tells me, right? So in that regard, she's like, oh my gosh, like what are you guys doing? Like her teachers are like, you know, she's so great at these things. I'm like, we're rewarding effort, not accomplishment, right? So every time she comes home and we got whiteboards all over the house, or every time she like wants to read a book, it's like, that's fantastic, right? And she's getting a lot of that mirrored behavior, one from her internal state of curiosity being perpetually nurtured as much as I can, right? And she's also looking to me of like, well, what's dad doing? Is dad always on his phone? And no, dad is not always on his phone. Dad is always like writing on whiteboards and reading books and journaling and like drawing, right? And playing with the cat or like working out in the garage or like talking with friends. Like I'm trying to nurture an environment that mirrors who I know she can be and create an environment around her that allows her to bloom without judgment of me thinking I know what's best for her.
Yeah, it's interesting because emotional eating, psychologists say that, yeah, it was modeled by our parents. We saw themselves shutting down their emotions with food. I have a question on resources. So I'm trying to ask, everything that you're saying is relevant. I'm trying to ask questions that I wouldn't be able to answer in my episode so that the listeners have different point of views. You were talking about resources. It's like we have this amount of resource, and let's say we in a way, what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, we can't use them all in the same day because then we're burned out. What is the role of willpower for you? I'm asking this question specifically because the diet culture makes people believe that if they eat, they don't have willpower and they're not strong enough. Where I feel is more emotional regulation. But what's your point of view?
So I think willpower, focus, discipline, and distraction are all extremely similar. And especially in the world of neuroscience, this is really true too. And I'm going to explain why that is. So the way that the focus power in the brain works is that it runs on like acetylcholine and it runs on like frontal cortex activity. So you and I are very engaged in an ongoing, creative, non-judgmental conversation here, right? That I feel welcome to receive challenge from you. And you would say, hey, that's wrong. And I wouldn't say, oh my gosh, like, yeah, screw you. And like, you're a bad person. I feel receptive to that because I feel safe in this environment, right? So like my focus can be a little bit more relaxed inside of this because I have anticipation and expectation that's going to match, and it has been matched in this environment, right? However, there is a limited amount of resources that we have every single day on how much we can focus. So there's a book out there from Cal Newport, who's an MIT professor, that starts to talk about associative learning and that you get 4 hours of this every single day, right? And most of us deplete all of that associative learning and creativity on things that are meaningless, right? All of these decisions and deep work.
Oh yeah, deep work. Yeah, I started reading it actually.
Yeah, it's a fantastic book. So like I'm not home right now, but I'm like looking at my brother's bookshelf to see if he has it. I bet he does somewhere.
Yellow.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So what Cal starts to describe to us is all of the decisions that are meaningless that we make deplete our willpower over and over and over again, because we only have the capacity every single day to do the hard thing when the easy thing is available. And that's the resource that we call willpower, right? But what willpower really is, if we think about it, it's our ability to basically put horse blinders on and focus on the one thing and eliminate other options, right? So we are directing all of our senses, all of our perceptions into the thing that we want to achieve more of, right? So when we start to talk about distraction inside of that, distraction is also a choice, right? But the problem with distraction is that it's also focus. So it's lazy focus, but every time you scroll on your phone, you're focused on that. And because you're not focused on a specific singular subject, which is why I tell people to use YouTube instead of like scrolling on specific things on, Instagram and TikTok, despite me making content on there. And I'll tell you how I use social media. When you scroll, it's subject to subject to subject. So it could be cars and then travel and then photography and then food, right? So the
Baby
constant
wipes.
shifting, correct. And the constant shifting over and over and over again of these different subjects does something to the brain. It's constantly having to flip what it's anticipating.
Mm.
And this is what is leeching like so much of our focus, right? And then we doom scroll for an hour, but it completely destroys our capacity to make decisions. And that decision to do the hard thing when the easy thing is available is our willpower. So the way that and just really quickly to help people out, I think every month should have a subject for people, right? I think every month you should give yourself a different subject to follow. So for this month, inside of the groups that I facilitate, it's self-sabotage and procrastination. Like literally after this, I'm going to go give a presentation on that. So what I teach is something that I learned probably 3 months ago that I know I can teach because I've deployed. And every single month, the people that I follow and the information that I consume on swipeable social media is in a singular topic, right? And after that person has posted it or that topic is done, it usually takes 10 seconds, right? Because it's one video or something like that. I'm off of there because my goal is to enrich and have a better understanding, and scrolling through things like I know social media is designed to steal those things away from me. And if I want to have an impact in my daughter's life, in my own life, in my purpose and mission on this planet, then I need to be stronger than like my lowest human inhibitions, right? My lowest human like impulses. So I use content in that way. And then I love YouTube. I love Reddit. I love Substack. I love Medium. Like all of those different threads that allow you to dive deeper into focus is really, really healthy. So using that in its own fortitude, a lot of discipline comes down to not having to think about what to anticipate next, and also rewarding yourself for every time you get closer and closer to that. So I think every day is a goal, right? Every day is a goal to make it to bed and feel a sense of intrinsic fulfillment so that when you lay down at night, you're like, that was a good day. Like I did good yesterday, right? So having a schedule to know what you're wearing, what you're eating, when you're eating it, and then being able to have rewards along the day too. That's how I stack up every one of my executives, right? So my executives that are burnt out, that's what we do. Like, all right, show me your schedule. And they're like, well, it's just full of meetings. And I'm like, yeah, but like you're going to be depleted by noon, right? So I bet you don't, I bet your schedule's packed till 5 p.m., but I bet when you get good things done, it's at like before noon. And every single one of them, I ask their assistants, right? Or I ask like their executive board or the C-suite board. I'm like, when is Tim most productive? And they're like, before noon. And I'm like, Tim, like, when do you eat? And they're like, yeah, I eat when I can. And it's like, okay, we got to fix that, right? So you need mental, you need physical and emotional breaks throughout the day, healthy ones, right? Not doom scrolling. And stacking your day up in that way will give you more structure. You'll feel like you have an infinite well of willpower because you've just maintained the resource of your focus. One of the best resources out there is like a giant wall calendar that's not just 1 month, it's 365 days, right? And you just put this giant thing. I mean, it's annoyingly large, but it kind of gives you a perspective to say like, oh, I did that. So I send that out to a lot of clients, and then I tell them, it's like, hey, with this resource, it would be really cool to just put stickers every time like you make progress along these ways. So I tell a lot of people to use those resources as well.
Okay, that's really interesting because I saw something on Instagram, on your Instagram, saying discipline is emotional scheduling.
Yeah.
Can you explain this to the listeners?
Yeah. So saying that discipline is emotional scheduling is essentially going down and saying that I want to look at how I want to feel and how I want to emotionally participate in life, and then putting those behaviors out into the world. So I think one of the biggest disservices that personal development has ever done, and I got to sit up straight because I get really passionate about this one, is sitting and thinking that I can sit in this chair right now, close my eyes, and manifest in the 3 pounds of meatloaf between my ears a emotional state of gratitude and appreciation. It's really, really hard to do that, right? Even when we look at people inside of fMRIs and we're like, make happiness, make sadness, make joy, make abundance, make peace, make like, sexual activity, all of these different things, it is extremely hard to do, right? So I would say for a lot of different people, ask yourself what kind of emotional state you want to be in. When was the last time that you had that emotional state? And write down the 3 things that you were doing when you experienced that emotional state, right? Most people say that they want to be happier, and I think that's a fantastic goal. What are the last 3 things, last 3 times that you were happy, right? Like real happy, like big happy. What are they? Write them down on a piece of paper and then schedule them throughout the week, right? Monday, Wednesday, Friday, right? I do this with my daughter all the time. Now, what's really interesting is that the anticipation of that happy behavior drives more happiness, right? So if you want to 2x your dopamine to drive more like deep-rooted behaviors, what you can start to do is to create anticipation for those things. Like Christmas is coming, right? So my daughter's anticipation for Christmas, like her happiness levels in December, like I'm sure if we measured it on like a chart, would be through the roof because she's anticipating Christmas morning, right? And it might sound so silly, but like the neuroscience behind this is like pretty concrete. So we can take a deeper look into that and say like,
Yeah.
awesome. I think people should have a goal that they can celebrate life on Monday, right? So if you love golf or you love putt or you like laser tag, awesome. After like getting through the weekend, Monday after work, go play putt, right? Or like my daughter and I on like Monday night, her and I get to go do like a cookie at sunset on the beach, right? Which is like a small special thing. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday for us is a movie night. The rest of the time, our TV literally is in our garage because we're a low-tech house. So she anticipates movie night. So we're constantly striving towards the anticipation of deploying effort for the reward and celebrating, no matter what, the effort that she's having, right, to get these specific things, but also knowing that she can anticipate that I'm not going to punish her for not getting the accomplishment along the way. We can stack up those things, and that's emotional discipline, right? It's stacking up anticipation for the state of being that you want to experience over periods of time. So like I knew that I was flying up to see my brother this weekend here. So like my system all week was like super excited to like come up. So I had an amazing week, right? Like the week before vacation for people or holiday, they're all tuned up and excited. And everybody's like, oh my gosh, you're so bubbly. It's the same week. The only thing that's changed is your anticipation for something that you're looking forward to. And this again breaks down to celebrating the habit, right? Over and over again. It really breaks down to these like small celebrations that we do over time.
Oh, thank you very much. It's really interesting how you're giving us tools almost to trick the brain. So thank you for that. There's so much more we can talk about, but I'm going to end the episode here. If people want more of, your content and your tricks and the science behind it, where can they find you?
Yeah, everything I do is at Dr. Chrisley. My website is drchrislee.com. Instagram, social media, TikTok. I have a podcast out there. And yeah, everything. If you just search my name, it'll pop up.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. See you, everyone.